History remembers the Minotaur as a punishment, a curse placed upon King Minos of Crete, a beast born of unnatural lust, half man, half bull, imprisoned in a labyrinth designed by the architect Daedalus. Deep beneath the Mythera plain, specifically within the Gortyn cave network, miles of unmapped tunnels that the Nazis used for storage in 1941 and subsequently abandoned due to personnel loss. There are fissures that swallow light, tunnels that do not appear on any geological survey, tunnels that smell of sulfur, wet fur, and something metallic, like brass, or perhaps old, dried blood. They say the beast was slain by Theseus, but myths are often propaganda for the victor, and sometimes a myth is just a warning that the fight isn't over. What if the labyrinth wasn't a prison for the beast, but a hunting ground that never closed? Tonight, we aren't reading a fairy tale. We are examining the testimony of Elias Thorne, a rational spelunker who went looking for history and found something that refused to stay buried. This is the brass-scented labyrinth, the trail of blood that marked the Minotaur's hunt. The Minotaur. I've been caving for 10 years. I don't do it for the thrill. I do it for the silence. There is a specific frequency of quiet that you only experience when you are 300 feet below the surface of the earth. It's heavy. It presses against your eardrums like deep water, muffling all internal noise. You can hear your own heartbeat echoing in your skull, and nothing else. My name is Elias. At the time of this event, I was finalizing my thesis on the subterranean geography of the Mythera plain in southern Crete. Most people associate the Minotaur with Knossos, the famous palace in the north. But any serious historian knows that the true labyrinth, the Labyrinto described by ancient travelers, was likely the cave system near Gortyn. It's a massive natural network of tunnels that the Nazis used as an ammunition depot during World War II. It's an anomaly of stone. I had permission to survey Sector 4, a peripheral area usually closed to tourists due to stability concerns. I wasn't looking for monsters. I was looking for water erosion patterns. I entered the system at 9 o'clock hours on a Tuesday. I had my primary light, 2 backups, a localized mapping sonar on my tablet, and enough rations for 12 hours. The descent was standard. The air was cool, hovering around 16 degrees Celsius, a constant, thick, damp cold, typical for limestone caves. For the first 2 hours, it was just me and the rock. I marked potential fracture points and updated the digital map. But around noon, I found something that wasn't in the archives. At the end of a narrow squeeze, a passage so tight I had to exhale fully to slide my ribcage through, the tunnel opened up into a chamber that worked. The walls weren't rough limestone. They had been smoothed, not by machines, but by something abrasive over centuries. The rock felt unnaturally warm, almost greasy. When I touched it, I checked my compass. The needle was spinning lazily. Magnetic interference is common in caves with high iron or content, so I didn't panic. But then I checked my digital map. The sonar pulses were returning garbage data, showing the walls shifting distances every few seconds, impossible geometry, where the tunnels seemed to overlap. I should have turned back. That's what you're screaming at your screen right now, isn't it? Turn back. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, especially when mixed with the geologist's arrogance that you can solve any puzzle. I moved deeper. That's when I noticed the smell. Usually, caves smell like damp earth and guano. This chamber smelled sharp, acrid, tasted like I was sucking on an old penny, leaving a coppery residue on the back of my throat. It was the smell of oxidized brass and copper. It was overwhelming, and underneath that metallic tang, there was a scent I recognized from my grandfather's farm. Heavy, musky odor, wet fur, but corrupted, layered with the deep, visceral scent of decay. I shined my light on the floor, in the thick layer of fine, undisturbed dust, which should have been undisturbed for decades. There was a drag mark, a wide, heavy groove in the dirt, as if a large sack of cement had been pulled deeper into the dark. and right next to it, printed clearly in the clay, was a footprint. It wasn't a boot print. It was a cloven hoof. But the size, God, the size of it. It was wider than a dinner plate. I knelt, pushing my glove into the soft clay. The track was unnervingly sharp, fresh. I told myself it was a prank. Some locals messing with tourists. Anything to rationalize the impossible. Then, from the tunnel ahead of me, the only way forward, I heard a sound that made my blood turn to ice water. It wasn't a roar. It was a heavy, wet exhalation, like a massive bellows forcing air through congested lungs, thick and hot. Whew. The sound carried a low-frequency vibration I could feel resonating in my chest cavity, not just in my ears. I froze. I turned off my light. Darkness in a cave is absolute. You can't see your hand in front of your face. I sat there in the pitch black, counting my panicked breaths, listening. Click, clack, hard keratin striking stone. Slow, deliberate, rhythmic, and getting closer. Every single clack was a hammer blow against my dwindling sanity. I held my breath until my lungs burned, tasting the brass and the fear. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. Felt intentional. I waited for 5 minutes. 10. My mind started playing tricks on me. Was I hearing things? Was the lack of sensory input causing auditory hallucinations? It happens to spelunkers. The cave madness they talk about. I risked turning my light on the lowest setting. The beam cut through the dust motes, illuminating the empty corridor. I decided to abort the survey immediately. I turned around to head back through the squeeze. This is where the reality of the situation broke me. The squeeze was gone. I don't mean I couldn't find it. I mean the wall where the opening had been was solid rock. No seams, no fresh masonry, just ancient, weathered limestone, cold and indifferent to my plight. I felt a wave of crushing, debilitating nausea. I checked my GPS again. Error. I checked my physical compass. It was dead still now, pointing precisely toward the tunnel I had just come from, as if that was the only way left to go. I ran my hands over the wall. Cold, unyielding stone. Panic began to set in, but it was a cold, quiet panic. I'm a rational man. I know geology. Walls don't move unless they do. I swear the tunnel had turned. Geologically, it's impossible for stone to shift in 20 minutes without a quake. But the scraping marks on the floor suggested heavy walls had been dragged. I remembered the legends. Daedalus built a labyrinth so complex that even he barely escaped it. Structure that was alive or was constantly being worked. I had no choice. I had to go forward, deeper into the brass-scented dark, hoping to find a connecting loop or a secondary exit. As I walked, the architecture changed. The natural cave gave way to hewn blocks, cyclopean masonry that looked pre-Minoan, stone blocks so perfectly fitted you couldn't slide a razor blade between them, and the debris on the floor became disturbing. I found a canteen. It was rusted through, but the shape was distinct. German Wehrmacht issue circa 1941. I picked it up. It was crushed flat as if run over by a tank. But there were no tank treads here. There were teeth marks, massive, flat teeth marks that had sheared through the metal. Felt like a deliberate warning. Further down, I found a modern sneaker, a Nike running shoe, blue, left foot. The laces were intact, but the heel cup was shredded, not torn, but pulled apart. Inside it, the sock was still there, and inside the sock, there was a small, fragmented piece of shin. Bone snapped clean at both ends. I dropped the shoe. I didn't scream, but I made a noise. A pathetic, high-pitched whimper that sounded alien in the deep silence. Clack. The sound came from behind me this time, much closer than before. I spun around, beam shaking violently. 30 yards back, where the tunnel curved, a shadow detached itself from the wall. It didn't so much walk as unfold. It was tall, at least 7, maybe 8 feet. It was broad, grotesquely broad across the shoulders. Stood on 2 legs, but the anatomy was all wrong. The knees bent slightly backward, like a grazing animal. stepped into the edge of my light. I didn't see a face. Not clearly. I saw massive, matted fur covering a chest that heaved with ragged breaths. I saw hands, humanoid hands, but thick and dark, clutching something white. A bone. Human radius bone. And I saw the head. It wasn't a bull's head like in the cartoons. It was a deformed, tumorous mass of flesh and bone, elongated and twisted, a caricature of bovine majesty. One horn was broken halfway up, splintered like old wood. The other curved wickedly sharp, stained dark and sticky at the tip. The smell of brass intensified, becoming suffocating. It wasn't brass. I realized it then. It was the metallic iron scent of old, spilled blood. A scent I was now inhaling with every terrified gasp. The thing huffed again, a wet, rattling sound, its breath clouding the dusty air. It lowered its heavy head, testing the light, and then it charged. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just sprinted, pushing myself to the point of collapse. The terrain was uneven, slick with moisture. I stumbled, scraping my palms raw against the sharp stone, but scrambled up instantly. Behind me, the sound of heavy hooves on stone was like a pneumatic jackhammer against the foundation of the world. Thud-clack, thud-clack. The rhythm of the hunt was terrifyingly fast, unnaturally fast for something that size. I took a sharp left into a branching corridor, then a right. I was trying to break the line of sight, twisting myself deeper into the geological nightmare. Help me, I screamed. Stupid, utterly stupid. Who was going to hear me? The ghosts of the German soldiers, or the countless victims whose bones lined the tunnels? I slid down a scree slope, tearing the back of my trousers, and landed in a pool of foul, stagnant water. The water was lukewarm, almost body temperature. I scrambled to the other side and wedged myself into a small, vertical fissure in the rock face, killing my light immediately. I pressed my hand over my mouth, eyes squeezed shut, praying to a god I hadn't spoken to in years, promising anything. The footsteps slowed. Click, clack, click. It was hunting. It wasn't just chasing. It was tracking. It had shifted to a stealth that was somehow more terrifying than its charge. I could hear it sniffing the air. Huge, wet inhales that sounded like water draining down a pipe. It was smelling my fear. It was smelling the metallic tang of the blood dripping from my scraped palms. The creature passed my fissure. Through the crack, in the absolute darkness, I sensed the heat radiating from it. It was like standing next to a furnace, an oppressive wave of heat and musk washing over me. I heard the fabric of its breathing, a wet gurgle like fluid sloshing in the lungs, right next to my head. It stopped right in front of my hiding spot. I squeezed my eyes shut tighter, tears leaking out against the rock. Please go away. Please. Something wet and warm dripped onto my forehead. Slowly, agonizingly, it rolled down my face. I didn't move. I didn't wipe it away. To flinch was to die. The creature let out a low, frustrated grunt. A deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the rock against my back, cracking my tooth fillings, and moved on. The hoofbeats faded into the distance, slower this time, as if waiting. I waited. I counted to 1,000, then 2,000. I turned my light on, shielding the beam with my fingers to keep it dim. I wiped my forehead. My hand came away red. It was blood. The creature was bleeding, or it was drooling blood. I looked at the water pool I had slid through. Now that I had light, I saw what was at the bottom. Bones. Hundreds of them. The larder. Some looked ancient, turning to dust. Others were yellowed. Some were sickeningly fresh and white. Skulls. Femurs. Ribcages cracked open, showing signs of having been gnawed. And mixed in with the bones were artifacts. A rusty German helmet. A digital camera. A set of car keys, still attached to a bright blue hotel key fob. A tourist pamphlet for the Palace of Knossos, dated last year. This wasn't a cave. It was a larder, and it had been actively restocked for centuries. I had to move. I crawled out of the fissure and looked at the direction the beast had gone. I went the opposite way, staggering forward. The tunnel began to slope upward. The air grew slightly fresher, a subtle shift from the death musk. Below, hope, sharp and painful, spiked in my chest. I ran until my lungs burned. The architecture began to look natural again. Rough limestone, stalactites, the comforting, messy geology of a real cave. I turned a corner and saw it. A faint, gray light filtering from above. A skylight, a natural chimney, leading to the surface. It was high up, maybe 20 feet, but the walls were rough. Climbable. I slung my pack and started to climb. My fingers bled immediately on the sharp rock. My muscles screamed in protest, but I ignored the pain. I was 10 feet up when I heard it. The returning rush of air. A roar. A deafening, bovine roar that sounded like a tectonic plate shifting, full of absolute rage and hunger. I looked down. It was there, right below me, framed in the circular base of the chimney. It was looking up. For the first time, I saw its eyes. They weren't red. They were white, milky, blind cataracts, completely opaque. It had navigated by scent and sound the whole time. The labyrinth did the rest. It reared up, swiping at the wall with a massive, clawed hand. The stone exploded where it struck, sending shrapnel into my leg. I felt the hot sting of the impact. I screamed and scrambled faster, adrenaline overriding the pain and logic. The beast slammed its massive body against the wall, shaking the entire chimney. I nearly lost my grip, my fingernails tearing on the rock. Come on, come on. I gritted my teeth, reaching for the lip of the hole, tasting salt and blood. I pulled myself up, dragging my bloody body through the opening just as a massive horn hooked the ledge where my boot had been a second before. The final sound was a grinding scrape of keratin on stone. I rolled onto the grass, the Macera plain. The sun was setting, bleeding purple and orange light across the landscape, the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. From the hole in the earth, a deep, frustrated bellow echoed up, shaking the ground beneath me. Then silence. I didn't go to the police. How could I? Officer, a Minotaur tried to eat me in a cave that doesn't exist on your maps. I walked until I found a desolate road, hitching a ride with a bewildered shepherd. I went to the hospital in Heraklion. I told them I fell during a hike and the rock slide cut my leg. The doctor stitched up my leg, applying 30 careful sutures. He looked at the wound curiously, tracing the line of the deep tear. This laceration, he said in broken English, shaking his head. It is strange. It looks like a goring, like from a bull, but dirty, very dirty. He couldn't explain the bruising pattern around it. I left Crete the next day, buying the first ticket out. I haven't been back to Greece since, and I will never, ever go into a cave again. I live in London now, 3rd floor apartment, far away from caves, far away from labyrinths. But trauma doesn't respect geography. Sometimes late at night, when the city traffic dies down and the silence tries to settle, I hear sounds from the apartment above me. The tenant is an old woman, barely weighs 100 pounds. But sometimes, I swear I hear heavy, cloven footsteps pacing back and forth. Click, clack, click, clack, slow, deliberate, always 2 steps. And on humid nights, when the rain hits the hot pavement outside, the smell drifts in through my open window. It's not the smell of rain, it's the smell of wet fur, the smell of old copper, the smell of brass, the iron of old blood. It's the scent of the hunter closing the distance. I kept the digital map from that day. The file is corrupted, the data scrambled, but every once in a while I open it, the last recorded position wasn't the Gortyn caves. According to the GPS data, for those 3 hours I was nowhere. The coordinates don't exist in any known global map system. They are literally a blank spot on the earth. I know what I saw. I know what hunted me. And I know that the labyrinth isn't just a place in Crete. It's a hunger, a structure that shifts, and a creature that perceives time differently. And once it has your scent, I don't think it ever stops tracking you. So do me a favor. If you're ever in an old place deep underground and you smell brass where there should be none, and you hear that awful wet breathing, don't investigate. Don't look for the source. Don't stop to think. Just run.
In the perfect